Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Jonathan Fowler, who is a spokesperson for UNRWA, that is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees. He joins us from Amman. Mr. Fowler, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We've seen the images, people sleeping in tents, people eating once every few days, if at all. What's your understanding of what the reality of life in Gaza is right now?
The reality, it's very difficult to find words to describe it. I mean, you know, and this affects our colleagues on the ground, who are themselves part of the community. You know, their families, their communities around them, suffering. I mean, it's an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, basically. Everywhere you look, all the indicators are horrific. You know, the levels of malnutrition, the level of war trauma injuries, child amputees, orphaned children, you know, families with a single survivor, entire families wiped out. I mean, I just keep going through the list. You know, the health impacts, the spread of disease, the fact that some people are still wearing the same clothes that they were wearing, you know, in October 2023, and all of these things. I mean, the sanitation situation, everything. I mean, it's a question of sort of almost plucking data, you know, sort of not out of the air as such, but you know, every statistic I look at is increasingly horrific. It's that level of horror.
There's been a lot of focus in the last 24 hours on the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's not the traditional UN aid system by any means. A lot of aid agencies have expressed discomfort with the so-called GHF. What's your issue with it?
Well, I mean, I would draw your attention to something that was said by its CEO, who quit a couple of days ago. And he said that, you know, he was quitting over concerns about the impartiality, neutrality, independence, and the very humanity of the entire project. Now, that was something that we in the rest of the United Nations system had been saying from the very moment that this concept was first raised. Those concerns have not gone away. You know, I mean, international humanitarian law is very clear about how it is supposed to function, how aid operations are supposed to function. They're supposed to function in an impartial way, in the interest of the population that needs to receive the aid, people in desperate circumstances. This is something, you know, the rules are not unique to Gaza. These are things that the UN does around the world. We're not sort of, you know, stuck in the mud on principles, that kind of thing. The point is that these principles allow a practical level of operation, you know, unbiased humanitarian aid that doesn't involve a party to the conflict. And sadly, I mean, you know, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has humanitarian in its name, but that does not make it compatible with humanitarian law. There is a system in place. There was a system in place. That system was able to function when it was allowed to function, able to scale up aid, bring it in massively during the ceasefire, do what was necessary to alleviate the impacts to a certain extent. And, you know, it's like the wheel has been reinvented pointlessly. And this is like a solution in search of a problem, this GHF.
Yeah, I mean, we were speaking to someone who used to work for who works for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, a former deputy mayor of Jerusalem, who took aim at UNRWA and says she's got a real issue with your organization, and amongst other things, accuses UNRWA of political bias. I mean, it's nothing new, but what do you say to those kinds of accusations?
I mean, as you rightly say, this is nothing new. I mean, it's constantly retreaded. These accusations are baseless. They're made for completely different reasons, which are effectively to sort of, you know, remove us from the picture. I'm not inside the heads of people who want to remove us from the picture, but the sense from analysts is that we are seen as a stumbling block to some kind of unilateral solution to the Palestine refugee situation. The point that the reason we're still here doing our job of work as mandated by the UN General Assembly for the past 75 years is there has not been a just and lasting solution to the issue of Palestine refugees. There's no question about that. So anybody who says, you know, we're biased, we're not biased. We're an independent neutral UN organization. We take such claims seriously. When endless claims have been made by the Israeli authorities about our organization, yesterday our Commissioner General, the head of UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini, made public extracts of a letter that he has sent to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, basically saying, you endlessly make allegations. We repeatedly ask for assistance in substantiating these allegations. We will take action, but we never get a response. That's how it stands, basically. So, whoever, whatever, former politicians from within the Israeli establishment may like to say, or even current politicians, those arguments are entirely spurious. We also hear, on the issue of humanitarian aid, we've heard constant accusations that somehow, militant groups, Hamas and others, are getting the bulk of the aid. That is, I have to say, to be quite blunt, complete rubbish. We are constantly hearing this, and yet, there have been members of the former US administration who've come out recently saying that they never even received any information at a private level from the Israeli authorities to back up these accusations that are made in public. This is why I said earlier, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is a solution in search of a problem. It's spurious accusations.
Yeah, what the Israelis say is that they want to distribute food, but to be sure that it doesn't go to people who are linked to Hamas. That's their argument. That doesn't stack up, does it, when it comes to humanitarian law?
It absolutely does not stack up. And I just wanted to emphasize something, which is, the way United Nations aid operations work and the way our agency works in the Gaza Strip is that we work without any intermediaries. So we know when we've been able to get aid in the past, we have known, that aid will come in, it will go to our warehouses all along the chain, right through to the hands of the person receiving the aid. We know, it's tracked. We even have, identity controls on the individuals getting the aid. Our understanding is that the current system, which is in place, doesn't even do those kind of ID checks. So, supposedly a solution to a problem which is an inexistent problem, but is actually perhaps making a problem itself. Again, accusations, baseless accusations, in an attempt to do something else.
One of the new developments we're following is there are reportedly 6 people who've been shot and killed by Israeli forces trying to reach an aid distribution point in Rafah, which is, of course, in the south of Gaza. I don't know if you have any details on that, but what does it say to us that people who are trying to get their hands on food aid are being shot at and killed? What can we read into that?
Well, I'm aware of these reports, of course. We don't have any presence there, so it's impossible for me to confirm any kind of details. But what I can say is that our operations, the United Nations aid operations, as I explained, function according to a system, a well-honed, well-practiced system which functions around the world, and it's about distribution of aid to people in need. This system where people are required to come into effectively an obliterated zone to then stand in lines to pick up aid, and it's not done in a sort of basis of family size. This is our understanding, that it's basically whoever's there gets given it. Well, if you're a family which is lucky enough to have 4 or 5 surviving young male relatives, that means you're more likely to be able to get the aid in this current system, as opposed to what happens to the amputee or the widow with children, people who are far from these zones where they're supposed to come. We other UN agencies have raised the specter of aid being used as bait. And that is quite shocking because that flies in the face of international humanitarian law. But there's also a basic principle of humanity here, which is that our system enables people who are in need to receive what they need, or at least, a step towards what they need. And nothing is being done in this case. So when we hear reports of violence, these kind of things, again, it illustrates the fact that this project is basically flawed.
Just in terms of definitions, I just want to ask you about your understanding of the situation with regards to the food situation in Gaza. We're being told that famine is imminent by some saying famine has already started. 500,000 people face starvation. Just talk us through the definitions. Are we at the point where we can say there is a famine in Gaza?
I mean, sadly, famine, in common parlance, yes, it's a label used to describe a hunger crisis, but in technical terms, it's an analysis of certain criteria, and then the label famine can be applied. But the problem is when those criteria have been met, that means the famine has already started. And we've seen in the past, for example, in cases like Somalia, sort of 30-something years ago, where the declaration of famine came, months after tens of thousands of people had already died. Now, we see pockets of famine-like condition across the Gaza Strip. The issue is, when do those pockets start to, coagulate? Where do we see more and more of this? We see increasing numbers of patients with severe malnutrition. I mean, this is an easy thing to assess, particularly in young children. You just measure the circumference of their arm, with a special tape measure. And basically, if the tape measure goes into the red zone when you pull it, you know that the child's arm is too small for their age. We're seeing cases of stunting amongst children across the Gaza Strip. So, the here and now, people need to get food. People need to get, the kind of food that can alleviate these impacts, or indeed the medication, and they're not able to get any of that. But we're also talking about the future, because for children, we're in a situation where cognitive and physical development can be affected for years, with societal impacts, for decades to come. But yes, I mean, there is not enough food in the Gaza Strip. The amount of aid no aid was allowed to come in because of a complete siege imposed by the Israeli authorities since the beginning of March. That siege was likely lifted last week. A little bit of aid came in. But we need basically about 600 trucks of supplies per day to meet the minimum standards, the minimum level, the minimum survival needs, basically, of the population. And it's not just about getting food now, because people have basically been very, very physically damaged. Their health has been damaged by not having enough to eat over months. They've been rationing what they had, and eventually that didn't even work. We've heard horror stories where, an anecdote from a mother, one of our colleagues told us about, which was, she took the bread and she said, I break the bread in half, I give half to my children, I save the rest for tomorrow. That's stark.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And I just want to ask you, Jonathan, because we're nearly out of time, but I just want to ask, from your own experience, are there any parallels you can draw with anything you've ever seen anywhere else in the world?
I mean, I've worked in a number of different zones, in my UN career and before. I've never seen aid weaponized to this extent. The denial of aid as a weapon of war, and that's not me alone saying and seeing that. I mean, colleagues who have even greater experience in humanitarian situations than I do. This is unprecedented. I cannot think of a similar precedent for the duration, the impact, certainly not in the existence of the United Nations.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Jonathan Fowler, UNRWA spokesperson. Thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot.